Whether you're planning on building your own DIY cold plunge using a chiller or purchasing one like the Desert Plunge here that comes with a chiller, you're probably gonna have a lot of questions about what is the right chiller size that I need to be using. In this video, we're gonna go over everything you need to know before deciding what chiller size you actually need. Now, before we get into that, I do wanna say a quick thank you to Armra for being a channel sponsor. They started sponsoring my channel once they realized that I consume a lot of colostrum. There's so many benefits to consuming colostrum on a daily basis from a young age to an older age. It's really good for everybody, especially for people who have a deficiency in their diet or maybe have some gut issues. I wouldn't even consider Armra colostrum a supplement. I would consider it a bioactive superfood, something that you can actually consume as a food. Your body loves it. You'll love it. I think you should check it out after this video. I'll have a link down in the description below. So the first question to ask is, what's the right size chiller that you need for your tub? Now, there's a lot of questions that you need to ask to follow that question up to figure out exactly which size you need. You see, these chillers, which are what cool the water down in your cold plunge, actually come in a lot of different sizes, and there's a lot of different varieties. They start all the way down at 1/10 of a horsepower, and they go all the way up to 1.5 horsepower, in some cases even more than that. A pretty standard size chiller that a lot of people use in their cold plunge, me specifically, is the 1/4 horsepower active aqua chiller, the 1/2 horsepower active aqua chiller, and if you have an uninsulated tub and you're gonna be leaving it out in the sun baking, the full horsepower chiller is about the peak of what you'll need. Now, I'm gonna get into the details of each of those as we get into this video, but primarily I wanna talk about what is the right size chiller for each individual need, because there's a lot of different needs. There's a lot of different ambient temperatures. You see, I live here in Tampa, Florida. It is currently 90 degrees. And as you see here, my Desert Plunge is sitting on the top deck here with no cover, baking in the sun all day. The craziest thing is this 1/4 horsepower chiller that it comes with keeps my water at the exact temperature that I want it all day long. And the reason for that is because this tub is insulated. Insulation makes a massive difference, and a lot of the cold plunge companies out there are starting to realize the importance of having insulation in their tubs. You see, for me, I started using a galvanized trough, which had absolutely no insulation, and a lot of people start with the galvanized trough or the Rubbermaid tub, and they want to save a little bit of money, so they buy the 1/4 horsepower chiller, and they realize that that thing is on like 24/7, consuming power and struggling to get your water down. But when you add insulation, like on this Desert Plunge here, it makes a massive difference, and this chiller barely ever has to kick on. And we're gonna talk about why that is here in just a second. But I wanna encourage you, if you are gonna be building your own cold plunge, don't skimp on the chiller or don't skimp on the tub. And if you really want to save some time and frustration, I encourage you to check out the Desert Plunge. I'll have a link down in the description below with a discount code that you're more than welcome to use. Feel free to check that out at the end of this video. But now let's talk about the differences in the different size chillers. I do a ton of research before I make any video and put them on YouTube, because I want to make sure that you get the right information and not just my opinion all the time. So I did a lot of different research, and I want to go over this. All chillers and heaters typically have something called a BTU attached to them, and that stands for British Thermal Unit. And it's a formula to figure out exactly the amount of energy required to move the temperature either up if it's a heater or down if it's a chiller by 1 pound of water and by 1 degree Fahrenheit. That's what a BTU stands for. And if you want to figure out the equation, 1 BTU typically equates to 3.29 watts or 1,055 joules. So that's what a BTU is. What does that actually mean in our chillers? Because if you start doing research on different size chillers, you're gonna realize that there's different BTUs, horsepowers, power consumption. There's so many different things attached to them. And then, not to mention the price. The price typically fluctuates between a couple $100s and even a couple $1,000s. Well, let's talk about some of the more common size chillers here. I wanna start with the 1/4 horsepower chiller. Now, this is talking about the active aqua chiller. It's the chiller of choice that I've used for years and I've had no issues with. And yes, I know on the website it says not rated for outside. Myself, thousands of others, Desert Plunge, even Plunge, many of the other companies have all used these active aqua chillers, left them outside in all the elements, and they've been working perfectly fine. That's not me telling you that nothing can happen. That's just telling you nothing has happened to me. So let's talk about the 1/4 horsepower chiller, and I wrote down some notes here, so I'm gonna be looking down at my little journal just to make sure that I get the numbers perfectly correct for you, okay? So the 1/4 horsepower active aqua chiller weighs 41 pounds. And I think that's important because as we get bigger, they get heavier. The 1/4 horsepower chiller is rated at 3,010 BTU. What does that mean? We'll talk about that. The pump size recommended for the 1/4 horsepower is 925 gallons per hour. The volume of tank is 92 gallons of water, and the power consumption of the chiller alone maxes out at 4.7 amps. The fitting sizes that it comes with, meaning what tube size you can attach, is 1/2 inch and 3/4 inch. That's the 1/4 horsepower. Now the 1/4 horsepower chiller, I would say, is perfectly capable of chilling water in something like this Grizzly cooler with the Desert Plunge. It has the perfect amount of volume of water, the pump is perfect for it, and it keeps the water nice and cold because there's insulation helping that cooler keep your water cold so it doesn't have to kick on as much. But now let's say you really want to step it up and go to the 1/2 horsepower chiller because you live in a super hot environment and you're just afraid of having too weak of a chiller, and you're okay spending a couple $100 more and getting the 1/2 horsepower chiller. The 1/2 horsepower active aqua chiller weighs 49 pounds, so it's not much heavier than the 1/4 horsepower. It's rated for 4,020 BTUs, so 1,000 more. It can use up to a 1,600 gallon per hour pump, 172 gallon reservoir of water, and it only pulls 1 amp more at 5.4 amps. And for the 1/2 horsepower chiller, you can use 1/2 inch tubing all the way up to 1 inch tubing. Now I will say this real quick, side note, if you are going with a more powerful pump, the bigger tubing is going to be better. I would always recommend bigger tubing than smaller. You want more water to be able to flow through that chiller and more water to be able to cycle through your cold plunge. That's gonna keep your water cleaner, but also keep your water cooler. And the 1/2 horsepower chiller, I would say, is for anybody who does that. They live in a very hot environment, they're okay spending a little bit more money, and they really just wanna play it safe and make sure that their insulated tub is going to stay nice and cold for them 12 months out of the year, no matter what the weather's like. It's also a great touch if you plan on keeping your cold plunge outside in the sun. You see, if you have your cold plunge under a cover, even if it doesn't have a lid, it's gonna do a better job of keeping your water cold because it's not fighting the elements, it's not fighting the sun so much. The reason I really like the Desert Plunge is because it has an insulated lid that's also locking. Not only is it locking down, but it locks up, keeping it from falling over on my kid if the wind is really moving like it is today. And there are other cold plunges out there that use the Grizzly tub that don't have that locking mechanism, and yes, I have had the lid fall down on me. Thank God it was me and not my kid, and that lid was pretty dang heavy. So having that locking mechanism is a nice touch. Now let's talk about that full 1 horsepower chiller. This is the absolute beast, and if you have something with no insulation, it's pretty much my recommendation from the very bare minimum, no matter where you live, is to get a 1 horsepower chiller or more. And we'll get into the reasons in a second. Well, as per usual, my camera equipment all overheated because it's super hot outside, so I had to come inside for this last part. And I want to talk about the 1 horsepower chiller. Now, the 1 horsepower chiller is an absolute beast. And if you plan on having a multi-person cold plunge or even a cold plunging pool, this is probably what you're gonna need. There's a couple other uses for it, and we're gonna get into that in a second, but let's talk about the stats on the 1 horsepower active aqua chiller. It weighs in at 69 pounds, which is an absolute beast. 10,050 BTUs, which means it's going to cool your water down insanely fast. You can use up to a 3,900 gallon per hour pump, use up to a 250 gallon reservoir of water, and that's all great. Like I said, this thing's a beast. It does come with a higher price tag, and it's going to pull a lot more power. This will pull 10.2 amps. And what that really means is most of our household circuits are 15 amps for a room. If you have one chiller pulling 10.2 amps, it needs its own dedicated circuit, or you need to make sure that you have an electrician come and check it. Otherwise, you're more than likely gonna have a trip circuit on a regular basis, because if this is pulling 10.2 amps, your pump more than likely is going to pull 1 to 2 amps consistently as well. You're getting really close to maxing out. All you have to do is plug one additional thing in, and there's a chance your circuit's going to trip. So just keep that in mind. And then as far as the fittings go, which is the tubing and the components you're gonna have to use, it will only use 1 inch and 1 1/4 inch. So you can't use anything less than that unless you get a diffuser, which I've done in the past before, but I would highly recommend just using 1 inch to 1 1/4 inch components if you're going with the 1 horsepower chiller. So now let's talk about who is each chiller really for. Let's start with the 1 horsepower chiller, since that's where we just ended, right? The 1 horsepower chiller is a great chiller if you plan on using a galvanized trough, Rubbermaid tub, keeping it outside, and you live in a hot climate, and you just wanna make sure that your water's always cold. If you have no insulation at all, the 1 horsepower chiller is gonna be what you're gonna wanna use, but keep in mind, it's gonna cost you a little bit more money. So you can save on the tub, but you're gonna spend it on the chiller and the pump and the components because they will be more expensive. Another good use for the 1 horsepower chiller, like we mentioned, is if you plan on having a larger tub that you wanna have multiple people get in at the same time. But let's say that's not our case. Let's say we just want a single independent cold plunge that the water's always cold, the water's always clean. What's the right chiller size for you? Well, I would say that the 1/2 horsepower chiller is a great option, but truthfully, the numbers don't change too much between the 1/2 and the 1/4. The prices are very similar, the BTUs are very similar, the power consumption is very similar, all of the metrics are very similar. And in my experience, and I test these things like crazy, using this 1/4 horsepower chiller that comes with this Desert Plunge, I've had absolutely no issues with it at all. And I live in Florida where it's always hot. I also keep it outside in the sun. There's not even a tree blocking the sun from this thing. It is baking in the sun the second the sun rises to the second the sun sets. But my water is always exactly where I want it. I would have to hear from you if you had an experience where you maybe purchased a 1/4 horsepower chiller, used this kind of setup, and it totally failed you, for it to change my opinion. But right now, like I said, I leave the lid open. The kids are constantly in and out of this thing, grassy feet, and my water is always cold, my water is always clean, and I've been very impressed. So for right now, I could say that the 1/4 horsepower active aqua chiller, that little friend right there, super quiet little friend, pulling not a lot of power, just doing its little work, has been very impressive, and I think it's all you really need. However, if you think otherwise, please let me know in the comments below. I love discussions, I love opinions, I love to hear from you what you're truly thinking. So if you think that there's a better option than this 1/4 horsepower chiller for an insulated tub like this, let's talk about it down in the comments below. Let's start that discussion and chime in. I want to hear it from everybody out there. Let's create the best cold plunge community ever in the comments of this video. I want to hear it from you guys. And then also, if you just want to get a cold plunge, like you just want to buy one and you want to just get a good budget-friendly cold plunge that's going to keep your water cold and quick, check out the Desert Plunge. Like I said, I'll have the links down in the description below, discount code you can use. Check it out. Do your own research, obviously. Figure out what's the best for you. Hi, little friend, my little plant friend over here. Figure out what's best for you, but I definitely can recommend the Desert Plunge and say it's a great option. Like always, if you have any questions, pop them down in the comments below. Let's have a discussion. Make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel if you're not already, like and subscribe, all that fun YouTube stuff. I appreciate you for watching. Have a great day and God bless. But hey, before you go, if you haven't seen my full review of the Desert Plunge, I want you to check this out right here. I'm gonna pop that video right here because I go over exactly how to set this up. It's super easy, kind of similar to a DIY, except they've already done the hard part for you, and you can have it set up and get cold in no time. So go ahead and check that video out right here.